So last episode we talked about verticality and what it means to balance the different areas of your map. So how about we push that even further? What does it mean to balance and craft each area of your map regardless of verticality? Pathing completely dictates how your map is going to play. Pathing includes the man cannons that shoot you across the map, or the skill jump that allows you to skip the vulnerable corner, or the open window that lets you shoot into an enemy spawn. If there's a single thing that I want to emphasize in this video, it's that pathing needs to emphasize offensive play. Outside of Halo map design, Halo as a series, or even the first-person shooter genre, the best games I have seen of any genre all enforce offensive play. Games that reward defensive players usually fall apart at a competitive level because doing nothing is better than doing something. And we don't want that. We want our players to move, fight, push, make choices, not just sit back. So throughout this episode, we're going to be talking about what pathing should be, what it should do, bad examples of it, good examples of it, taking player counts into consideration, creating a room-based map versus an open-air map, and more stuff at the end. So I talked about verticality in my prior video and how to balance differently elevated areas of the map to promote constant movement. However, on its own, verticality means very little. How players reach and interact with those vertical segments completely dictates how they perform their intended duties. Having too many pathways on a single map leads to what we call the Swiss cheese effect, which is basically a loss of direction or flow on the map. This happens when you place too many jump ups, too many redundant pathways, or too many entrances into a single room. Having too many pathways on a single map means you cannot intentionally counter another team's movement, but rather just hope to stumble across them at an inopportune time. I would argue that a very limited amount of entrances and exits provide an experience that players can actually predict movement and make choices around. Even just having a single entrance in and out of a room allows mind games between two players if the two choices actually offer meaningful pros and cons in either direction. This allows so much at a subliminal level outside of just raw predictability. Fewer paths allows players to work as a team to trap, punish, and predict enemy movement even off of their respawn. It allows players to grow a situational awareness that wouldn't otherwise be possible. In Halo 3, the map The Pit had several really limited pathways, which would be great if they weren't directly right next to one another, meaning that regardless which route you take, the end result is the same thing. It's redundant pathing that only hurts the map. In order to make the most of your pathing, each route in the map has to ideally provide unique results. Honestly, modern map design has bred this sort of entitlement with players where they believe they should be able to access any part of the map as they will. They get really frustrated when they can see part of the map, but they're not able to go there right away. And while every area of a map should be vital in some way, I don't believe that they all need to be equally accessible. Take a look at Damnation. If a player wants to retrieve the overshield, they're making a very intentional decision to drop from what might be the highest point on the map to the very lowest, most exposed area, with very limited options from that point. There aren't 4 doorways to run behind or gravity lift to shoot them away. They have to choose one of 2 doorways and fight their way back up to the top of Damnation room by room unless they land the grenade jump. This choice more often than not can make or break a game, and it truly stresses the chemistry of teammates and how they each move independently throughout the map. It's the tough choices that show how different players might react to the same situation differently. After all, no 2 chess masters go into every game with the same strategy. A game designer can balance multiple areas of a map simply by manipulating how accessible they are. Imagine Guardian if there was a receiver node at S2 with the sender node being placed in shotgun tunnel. How defendable would the snipe tower now be? The more routes you create that lead to a power position, the less powerful it becomes. If you wish to preserve the influence of that area of the map, it's up to you as a forger to make sure it's exactly as accessible as it needs to be to remain in balance with the rest of the map. For example, while I was building my map Trinity, I received feedback several times that the highest point of the map was too difficult to reach. In an effort to address these complaints, I placed a man cannon in the lowest corner of the map that would add a 3rd route up to the highest point. Problem solved, right? I mean, the top is more accessible and the lowest corner has... You fucking retarded! No. In retrospect, adding that man cannon further devalued other areas of the map that I had designed to perform a single duty. Now there were 3 entrances to the highest catwalk and only 1 was being used the majority of the time. The amount of foot traffic on that high catwalk was completely disproportionate to the rest of the map. I mean, the power gain from the highest catwalk completely dwarfed how easy it was to reach that position. So if I had stuck with my original intent with the design, the highest point would have remained a low traffic route with high advantages and repercussions. It's extremely important that the value of any given point of a map needs to match its difficulty to control it. Stick to your objective understanding of what a map needs and not what a player might feel in a given moment, because even the most perfectly designed map isn't fun for a team of players who are getting crushed. It's just not representative of its quality. Teleporter entrances to rooms aren't the only means of interaction. Open sightlines in and out of an area are another means of pathing that affect decision making. One-way entrances are huge factors when it comes to accessibility of certain areas that play a role in how players can counter another team with movement. And essentially, these are one-way ledges and teleporters that help serve the offensive team and not the defensive. The optimal player count of a map should play a huge role in the pathing as well. A map designed around 2v2s might have fewer choices than a map designed for higher player counts to accommodate for some amount of countering and predictability. I mean, a 2v2 map might have a single entrance and exit out of a given area, which would allow a skilled and cohesive team of two to trap and surround another team, or a single hallway with a dead end and a power-up at the very end of it that you would have to have your teammate watch you as you grabbed it. When you add in another entrance or jump up or escape route, this whole concept goes to shit. A 4v4 map might have 3 or 4 entrances into a given area to provide an opportunity to break setups that larger teams are able to execute much easier than a team of 2. Even so, keeping the amount of paths limited to 2 or 3 gives teams the ability to stack their advantages down a single path, which makes encounters a little more interesting, like sending 3 players down a single path and 1 down another, instead of just 4 paths, 1 for each player. And this plays into the nature of open air maps versus room-based maps. I mean, room-based maps isolate actions so that players have to make very intentional pushes and pulls into different areas of the map to get into direct encounters. Open air maps typically have sloppier bleeding line of sights that make different locations of the map perform roles that they're not really intended to. This often leads to less purposely crafted encounters and roles to different areas of the map unless your line of sights are taken into very, very careful consideration. It offers players more room for creativity, however, it also has the downside of breeding a team shooting meta, which can be alleviated by dividing the maps into a room-based nature which emphasizes more individual play. And a side effect of this is how players react to the map off of their respawn. Aside from the initial spawn of the game, a player when respawning is going to think 1. How to assist his partner quickly, 2. How to kill the enemy that just killed him, or 3. What weapons are nearby that might personally help that player. Now, a heavily divided map will prevent a player from reaching a teammate in time to assist him before a 2 versus 1 encounter. A vastly open map will not punish the player for dying, since upon respawning it'll be easy for him to continue to shoot the enemies that just killed him. How divided the map will be is completely up to you, and this dictates how much you want to reward the offensive team for a successful push or punish the defensive team that has a player down. So if you didn't get all that, but you want to dig even deeper into map design, I've brought along a special guest. His way with words, however, might be a little different than mine.
What up, fuck boys? It's Curse Lemon here with another angry video bitch. I'm just kidding, it's not really gonna be that kind of thing. Or fucking is it? It's really not, though. So, maps. A somewhat subjective endeavor, but is it really? Only to the extent that one needs to clearly describe their goals before moving forward with the design, which is similar to any other stage and sector of the development process. With maps, however, oftentimes you find that not only will they regularly surprise you both positively and negatively, it's also a bit easier to describe them in terms of what they do wrong instead of what they do right. A good map is like good IT support. If it's doing its job right, you'll take it for granted and start questioning why we're devoting resources to something so simple. More seriously though, the object of a map is both to provide guidance and flow to the gameplay, while at the same time staying out of a player's way and making a concerted effort to avoid crippling his ability to challenge his opponents. After all, we're here to watch the players, not the maps. It's worth mentioning that the maps are just one component in a synergy of many different properties that a game showcases. There may be one negative element that simply cannot be fixed by map design, or one element that can be completely cured by it, and anything along the spectrum in between. You can have map elements that are positive when considered in isolation, but become nagging problems when paired with faulty mechanics. And likewise, you can very easily have a game that functions so brilliantly that bad map design can hardly take away from it. Anything that can be discussed regarding maps can be completely counteracted by the game those maps are in, so this makes threshing out the finer points of map creation fairly fluid. The first thing we have to establish to start talking about maps is what game we're going to be playing on top of them, and naturally the context here is going to be about Halo. I'll forgo speaking about the balance of maps in regard to Halo 1 for a couple of reasons, one being that Halo 1's gameplay cannot uniquely be crippled by map design, and another being that these concepts ring true for all Halo games regardless. So take this information under the premise that I'm speaking about team shot heavy Halo, because that's an important factor we have to consider when talking about maps and the subject of this particular video, which is pathways. The second thing we have to hammer out before we begin is, what do we want to see out of a Halo match? This is also incredibly important because the way a map is designed can have huge influences on the strategies of those that play on it, and we need to decide what we want to encourage. Generalizing very broadly, I will speak in such a way that assumes that run-and-gun arena routes of Halo is preferable to the cautious, stealthy gameplay typical of a squad shooter. All that said, let's take a look at a map that gets absolutely everything wrong: Lockout. The list goes on: tower defense, no man's land, poor use of verticality, so on and so forth, but let's hone in specifically on the pathways. Assuming 4v4 gameplay, what are our traversal options when we want to get from one side to the other? You can bolt it top mid to B2 or library, you can sneak it bottom mid to sword or B1, or jump it top blue to open ramp. 3 different options, none of which are appealing in the least. You might be asking, isn't it good map design to make it difficult to cross the map? After all, it involves a good bit of team cohesiveness to prevent the other team from breaking BR setup. Well, that may be true, but we must remember one of our core tenets of Halo gameplay involves constant player cycling and the ability to flank. Now, this map has multiple issues, not the least of which rests on the fact that there are only 2 power items on the map, and only one of which is actually a gun that also happens to be placed at one of the bases. Suffice it to say, this is not conducive to good gameplay in the least. However, this video is an exercise in working with the physical map geometry, so that's what we'll be focusing on changing. The idea is to create flow without causing complete chaos. Strictly speaking, if you want to eliminate stagnant gameplay, you can make every single room on the map accessible by every single axis, plus a teleporter. Lockout, meanwhile, goes with the exact opposite concept, which is to make every single traversal route able to be fired upon from every defending angle. Neither of these are good map design for Halo. The first creates a sort of fuck-it-all feeling where one can't reliably defend themselves by relying on their map awareness, which is a certain kind of skill we want to preserve in a restricted capacity, while the second squashes any ability for real individual effort except where luck prevails and one opponent happened to take his aim somewhere else in those few short moments. How do we fix it? In this instance, more traversal routes and easier vertical access would be the most expedient way. But as previously mentioned, what we don't want is someone constantly having to worry about enemies popping up behind them. We are trying to incentivize motion but avoid introducing complete and utter chaos. For instance, a very efficient way of creating turnover in BR Tower would simply be to put a portal on back library ramp. But how would you feel if you were holding down sniper on back BR and were repeatedly getting assassinated by a porting player? This is doubly inappropriate. Firstly, if you're going to drop a portal in a power position, you must make it clear that this portal is about to be activated. A good way of doing this would be to put a portal on bottom blue nade ledges. Since the ledges are inaccessible from bottom blue, a player would be forced to expose themselves on top blue to drop down, cluing the team on BR to his impending approach. Furthermore, it would be in the interest of balance to place this portal in the open space of B3, thus costing the porting player some exposure. A good comparison is the Damnation portal from Plasma Spawn up to Catwalk, where a player gets a great firing lane on top green but is putting himself out there in a major way. Another way would be to introduce catwalks from Blue Tower to BR Tower and Snipe, ideally S2 and B2 open ramp, which have a number of positive benefits geared towards deconstructing Lockout's bunker-like environment. This would turn what is presently a death trap in Blue Spawn into a legitimate avenue for progress across the map. Creating another elbow on the second tier would take the place of the current elbow in terms of a risky flank, but would conceal bottom elbow fully from S2 and at least partially from S3. A walkway up from the other side of bottom blue up to open ramp, a kind of third elbow, will give an easy but exposed pathway to allow Snipe Team to challenge BR Tower, and will also be an easier avenue to put fire pressure on B2 without having to worry about constant harassment from Window and Plasma Spawn. One final change would be to extend a walkway from Sword all the way behind S1 to create a back door from BR side under S3 ramp, but one that will have a clear line of fire. What will this look like in practice? The aim is to give Lockout a more circular sense of play. Because there is so little voluntary incentive to move with only a sniper on the map, it's difficult to enforce constant cycling without providing more access ways to relieve the current choke points. Ideally, this would create an even distribution of attention between the upper and lower halves of the map, which would allow for more aggression up top. However, we have been careful to preserve the coherency of the experience, as a team can still competently fight from all three corners of the map without constant worry of someone entering in behind them. We have provided one access point to each of the main map areas that is mostly protected from map crossfire and takes pressure off the central choke point of bottom mid, which expands the coverage duty of any team who wants to fortify an area of the map. What we've essentially done is made the long routes easy, although exposed, while leaving the shortest ways centralized, which spreads the focus across the whole geometric space of the map. Access provided around the bottom rung of the map ensures that players can effectively challenge the other side, but do not automatically get the benefit of top control. By attempting to make top blue a legitimate firing position, we've taken away the trench warfare aspect that bogged down so many Lockout matches. Deconstructing Lockout is easy, given that we have over a decade of competitive history to analyze its faults. However, it's not too difficult to take it at face value and see that the heavy focus on bottom mid choke point, the featureless no man's land of top middle, and the escape hole from bottom blue that leads right back to bottom blue are simply not rational design choices. Lockout as it is designed for lobbing pot shots over the top of the map, as it is completely impossible to support a player trying to rush bottom mid. With more options given, but care to make those options largely individual efforts, coordinated pushes are much easier to achieve. Does this solve the problem completely? No, and it never will if there is simply no reason to go across the map at all due to lack of power items. Put camo on blue ledge opposite our new portal and some rockets in B1, and you've got yourself a whole new map, even without the geometrical alterations. But we've done the best we could with what we have, solving the problems that were achievable by tinkering with the map geometry without completely redesigning the level. Congratulations, you now understand a little bit more about how to avoid creating the next penance.